All right, guys, so this is the video I've been waiting for. This is, if there's only one video that you watch in this entire series, it's this video right here. This is where all of the power is. This is where all of the magic is. This is the engine of this entire selling perceptions system. Now, I'm making a big deal about it because I want you to pay attention to it, but it's going to seem like it's not that powerful. It's going to seem like it's very basic. And it's going to seem like it's obvious that maybe that's what you should do. But I promise you, if you take my advice here and you do what I tell you to do, and you implement this exercise that I'm about to go over, this can take you anywhere you want to go in your life. Okay, this can get you the relationship you're looking for. This can get you the business connections you're looking for. This can get you to sell the products you're looking to sell. This will take you anywhere because you'll be able to adapt to and bring out the right aspects of your personality instantly. And you'll be able to do that whenever and wherever you want. Okay? So here is the basic methodology. When I was looking up to those magicians and later on up to those internet marketers, one of the things that I would do is while I was driving, and at the point of being a magician, I actually for a period of time worked as a dealer at the casino, and it was about a 45-minute to an hour drive depending on how bad the weather was. And I would spend that entire time while I was driving practicing my magic routines. Okay, so I would go through these in my head, but I wouldn't just practice them as though they were my routines. What I would do is practice somebody else's routine. So I had a couple of magicians I looked up to. One of them was named Bill Malone, and he had this really very happy and free sort of style to him, and his presentation was very funny. He had this really neat way of pattern interrupts, and the tempo of his thing was this joke insertion thing that he constantly does through the routines to spice up the performance of the magic. So the trick was almost a small part of the entire presentation, but it was amazing to watch because the presentation was so good. And I would run through these routines in my head out loud, so not in my head, I would run through them out loud in my car as though I was performing to a real crowd of people. Now, that sounds like an obvious thing, like that's a visualization exercise if you've studied any personal development or anything. But it's a step further because it has to be out loud and it has to involve your body, because what you're actually doing is triggering a physiology when you do this exercise, okay? And I'm going to give you some examples here in a minute, but I want you to understand how this impacts you. First off, you have the mental aspect of thinking through the routine that you've had to memorize. And not that you're always going to be dealing with a memorized routine, but initially that can really help to go through and memorize somebody else's speech, because you really get the feel for their tonality, their tempo, and all of those sort of things, and just go over that while you're driving. So you have the intellectual piece of it here, the mental piece. You start to, with tonality and with the pacing of your voice, you start to invoke an emotional response. And there's a particular emotion that connects with it. Maybe it's excitement, maybe it's empathy, maybe it's compassion, maybe it's joy. Whatever it is that you label, it's going to be a core part of the communication of that particular piece. And then you're going to have the physiology or the body language. And that is what happens to your shoulders when you start speaking this way. Are you slumped down? Are you up straight? Are your arms moving around? Do you feel loose and dynamic? Or you feel stiff and uncertain? How are those things being conveyed in your communication? And as you start to become familiar with that, through practicing somebody else's routine, you start to graft over their confidence. You start to graft over their emotional space, graft over their physiology, graft over their language, and all of those things. Because it's hitting your brain from all of those angles at once, it very quickly becomes part of you. But it's a part that you can shut on and off. And that is the most beautiful thing about it, okay? So when I started the internet marketing phase of my career and kind of let magic fall to the wayside professionally, I still do it today, just not professionally. I started studying some of the greats in internet marketing, and they were people like Frank Kern and Mike Filsaime and Jeff Walker and a whole bunch of those sort of people that were doing all sorts of promotions back 10, 12, 13 years ago. And Frank Kern was one of my favorites, still as a communicator, one of my favorites. And it's kind of funny because He claims to be quite an introvert himself. I've never actually met him, but he claims to not like big crowds of people, and he stays at home and stays away from people and whatnot, which totally makes sense because usually introverts, this is kind of a secret, usually introverts have the best ability to become great communicators. And the reason for it is because introverts tend to think about it much more deeply. Extroverts tend to do this somewhat more naturally, but it's very surface driven, and it may not connect all of the other points that an introvert might just in the level, just in the intensity of thinking. I'm being very general in that statement. That's not a sentence or a label on anybody or anything like that. That's just what tends to happen. So from that standpoint, I would take Frank Kern's talks and I would start to memorize them a little bit. I'd watch so much of his stuff that I would get an instant feel for how he was communicating. And I'd look at all of those elements I just talked about. What are the words he's using? What is the tempo that he's using? How's his body language? What's he communicating non-verbally, right? And I would just take mental note of that stuff, and you can certainly write it down if you feel like that's going to be more helpful to you. And I would ultimately look at pitching something in the car as though I was Frank Kern, or as though I was Mike Filsaime. And I'll give you an example of what that might be. So I had mentioned that I worked at Verizon for a period of time way back when, and I sold cell phones. Now, if I was going to do a standard pitch, and this is not going to be a good pitch, just if I was going to do a standard pitch for a cell phone, real quick, I might say, a smartphone is a multitasking device that would allow you to import your email, social media, and even make a phone call, maybe to your mom, all within about 60 seconds of each other. It's one of the most powerful tools of this generation, and certainly something worth your attention to check out, right? Not saying it's a good pitch or a bad pitch. There's not even a person to pitch it to here, right? I'm just giving you an example. If I took and added some Frank Kern to this, okay, I might look at this and go, hey, you might have been checking out some of those smartphone thingamajigs. I don't know if you've seen those crazy cats that are carrying those around these days, but did you know you can get your stinking email, check all of your social media, and even call your mom on this little thing, and you can do it in like lickety split. Like, if you're not checking one of these out, you're just not with the times, right? Now, my goal there was not to impersonate Frank Kern. I wasn't trying to be him, but if you notice the tempo I was using in my tone and the shift in language to the way that Frank Kern does his language is very, it's sort of poppy, sort of bubbly, and it has that like, those little adjectives like stinkin' and these little things that add to the overall personality of the presentation, right? And once you get a feel for that, you can just sort of turn that on, right? Now, Mike Filsaime, who's a very successful internet marketer as well, probably the guy that's responsible for a good chunk of my initial core foundational sales knowledge, he would present that probably very differently. Now, either Mike or Frank might see this video and they might go, you're out of your mind, Josh. I'm nothing like that. But that doesn't matter because what I was picking up from them is what I was able to assimilate into myself. And that changed my ability to present things. And that's going to be the same with you. You might be way off in your estimation of this, but you're using them as a guide. And you're using their content as a guide, right? So if I was Mike Filsaime, I might say, listen, if we were to look at a smartphone like this, there's lots of advantages to it. In fact, you're able to actually import your email directly into the device. It'll notify you. You can hook up all of your social media accounts to this and be able to check those on the fly. And if you need to do something like make a phone call, you just press this little thing right here and press your mom's contact info because she's going to want a call from you. You know that. And that's really what you're going to get the most out of with a smartphone, right? So it's a much more straightforward sort of feature approach to the sales part of it. It doesn't have the same pop in the little personality things. It's a little more focused, right? A little more mature maybe. And that's not to say that Frank is immature or place judgment on any of those. That's just the communication styles that they're different in how they communicate. And playing with those differences while you're driving, while you're in the shower, while you're at home alone and there's nobody else around, you do this out loud. And I can tell you that if you spend a few hours of your life doing this, you'll start to get such a feel for it. So over the next days, weeks, months, years especially, you're going to start to adapt these personalities into your own personality and turn them on and off like a switch. So that's the basic core method, but you must do it out loud. You must do it with somebody that you actually aspire to be, or somebody that you look up to and admire. Because if you're not in a place of admiration of the person, it can be very hard to connect with them at a different level. And if you are there at a place of admiration, you're already connected to them at a certain level, if that makes sense. You have a certain level of trust and likability with them and all of these different things that is just going to make it that much easier for you to adapt those characteristics. So with that, that is basically the exercise. Now, I told you beforehand, this is going to seem really simple. Don't let that fool you. This is dominantly powerful, you guys. So take that for what it's worth. I want you to start doing this exercise every single time you drive. I'm not going to tell you once or twice a day. I'm going to tell you every single time you go for a drive, every single time that you're in a shower or find yourself somewhere alone. Even if you're only doing it in your head, it has advantage because you can use language as a way to think. And you can think through those presentations that way. And you can still mimic them with some body language. You're just not doing it tonally, right? So every chance you get, if you want to be able to really influence people and really get the most out of the course that I'm giving you here, you're going to take that opportunity as much as humanly possible and integrate those people into your presentational style.